The town of Libby Inn is the location of today's video. With a fantastic view of the Cabinet Mountains, Lincoln County, Montana, hello, Leslie from Canada's Cryptids. If this email does not reach Leslie from Cryptids Canada, please let me know. All things considered, dear relax in light of the fact that it has contacted me, and do I ever thank God for this story? What? Oh, what? All things considered, simply listen, you folks. In a moment, you'll see what I mean. He adds, I'm not good at this kind of thing. I find typing more difficult than I anticipated. Used to be the proprietor of a produce business, and afterward I purchased a shipping organization, and at the point when I requested my child to assist me with doing this email, he felt ashamed. He advised against embarrassing our family with this. People don't want to hear about it. He has no idea how long I've been listening to channels like this, and I do believe that people would be interested in hearing my account of the well-known Luella. Because he didn't like Luella very much, he just doesn't want me to talk about it. Well, I'll also tell you about that. I got the mental fortitude to do this email when I reviewed that you said the messages don't need to be awesome. My lovely wife Lori spent her childhood in a small house on a piece of land surrounded by woods. A pair of twins who were Lori's cousins were adopted by her parents. Because Lori's aunt and uncle were abusing the children, Lori's parents intervened and took them away. Now there is a perfect illustration of how doing a good deed is punishable. At the time, Lori was around 6 and her twin cousins, Karen and Paul, were 7, under a year between them. Unfortunately, Lori's father passed away after suffering a heart attack. Dory, Lori's mother, had no means of taking care of the family at that point. As a result, the community intervened and taught her how to cultivate a garden and raise chickens and goats. Later, they gave her a pregnant cow they called Hazel as a gift. In addition, they contributed to the construction of a barn and chicken coop. They made it through that difficult first year with some savings and insurance money. Dory accepted the marriage proposal of one of the gentlemen who had been assisting her after a number of years. Her friends introduced her to him because he was a doctor. 17 years later then, he died prematurely. Dory was able to keep the farm running, but she kept her husband's earnings to help her. He had insurance, but he didn't transfer it, so his ex-wife got it. Despite the fact that they hadn't spoken in years, she absolutely did not decline that money. However, that does not mean that I was a section proprietor in the produce organization at the time. We were paying rent in Brooklyn, and I mentioned a long-haul truck driver for the same company. To assist her mother in getting back on her feet, I indicated to Lori that I would be willing to live with her. I might be able to make it work with a few tweaks. In order to assist Dory, Lori and I packed up and moved to the farm. Even though Dory had raised twins, neither of them had taken up, despite the fact that neither of them worked or had families. Only once a year did they get to see Dory. That's what we did then. In 1974, we removed our child Bradley from school and sold all that we didn't need, and we headed to Lincoln District, Montana. More precisely, close to Libby. We probably could not have done a better thing for our son. Who was trying to persuade us to give him more room to hang out with his friends? Our child Bradley was just 9 at that point, disrespecting his parents in the same way that his friends did at the time. However, to be honest, we would not tolerate it, which proved to us that it was time to leave our predicament. Brooklyn, or anyway, I took a month off to help the family adjust to life in the country. Even though Lori spent her childhood there, it was very different from what she remembered. In those days, it was a little house in the country, far away in the countryside. It was then a working farm. The one thing that continued as before is that Lori's family possessed around 75 sections of land of thick woods and moving fields, and awe-inspiring vistas of the Cabinet Mountains in the distance. It was definitely prime land, with blue skies and green as far as the eye could see. Dory, Lori's mother, had taken up riding Speckles, her horse, into the woods. She still had a cow. She was the original Hazel's granddaughter. The cow's name was Daisy. A slew of chickens and 3 goats. She bought a couple of hogs to raise for the freezer shortly after we moved in. Lori would laugh and shake her head. She was in awe of her mother's transformation into a full-fledged farmer. It was consistently Dory that traveled to Brooklyn to see us. That was more economical. Therefore, it came as quite a shock to see that the house she grew up in is now a farm. But don't misunderstand me. It thrilled Lori, exactly the same as her mother did. That was the way it all started, practically immediately. At night, we began to hear sounds that were unusual. It almost sounded like a group of young people were having a party by the river. Those sounds were unfamiliar to even Dory. Dory came swiftly from the woods one early evening, riding up from there. As we were leaving the barn, she rode directly up to Lori and me. Dory was as ghostly white as snow. She stated, "You will not believe what I just saw." She claimed that she had exercised by pushing Speckles hard through the field because they were both exhausted. To cool them off, she decided to take them to the big stream. While Speckles was consuming alcohol, Dory was exploring the shallow sands along the stream to see if she could spot any gold. It appears that Dory's ancestors have always held the belief that gold can be found, albeit nothing at any point was seen, as apparently. She claimed to have heard some squealing, which she described as the rapid speech of a foreign language. She then peeked out from behind a large bush, and what appeared to be about 10 people were across the stream. Large men with hair like animals, some of them looked like children. However, they were all seated and appeared to be eating. However, Dory was initially blind to what they were consuming. She noticed a second person further away. It was seated with Dory and the group behind it. Then at that point, one of the enormous beasts, as she called them from the outset, she would later deny calling them that. Yet frankly, I think we as a whole called them that from the beginning, until we understood in an unexpected way. However, as I was saying, she said it got up and arrived at down and pulled a hunk of meat from the creature they were all gathered together, eating from. Dory said she was staggered when she saw its size. It had to be tall enough for Sparkles to see it. I think that would be about 7 or 7.5 feet tall, LOL. She claimed that it was covered in long dark hair and solid muscle. Later, we found that she was discussing the enormous kid as we named him, and I assessed he was greater than 9 feet tall, perhaps. We discovered that these guys, a lot taller than Dory thought, don't stand still to be measured. Regardless, Dory claimed that the monster placed that enormous chunk of meat in front of the one who sat away from the rest of them. She claimed that everything made her feel sick, and she rushed home after barely making it back to Sparkles. Naturally, we desired to learn more about what she was discussing. However, she claimed that because she had ridden Sparkles extremely hard, it was unfair to push him again, particularly when carrying 2 people. In those days, individuals didn't have these little homestead vehicles as they do these days. In those days, you utilized a pony to get around your farm. Regardless, we decided to visit the site the following day to see what we could find. However, we did not need to wait until then. Due to the insane commotion that night emanating from the woods, the entire house got up. We as a whole sat on the backyard simply tuning in. Occasionally, it sounded like a group of chimpanzees screaming, and then everything went quiet. Then you'd hear a single loud and threatening male make an effort to exert command over the entire fighting and panic. It eventually became quiet, and it remained quiet. We then all went to sleep. Naturally, we all woke up later than usual. Bradley was the one who got me up. He told Dad to get up. In the backyard, a monster has been killed. Then I overheard Dory and Lori yelling for me to hurry up. I awoke and dashed down the stairs. Yes, indeed. The lawn was covered in a huge pile of hair. I loaded my gun, and Dory and Lori armed themselves as well to basically cover me from the porch. Please keep in mind that this took place in the spring of 1975, verse 6. Not entirely certain anymore. I slowly left and got about 10 feet away from it. I smelled the contamination. I had worked as a doctor in Vietnam, but he was injured and was discharged with honor. I knew that smelled like gangrene. It made me sneeze. I saw the animal taking a deep breath, and I almost turned around. Oh my God, I thought to myself. I require your aid. My instincts told me to help it, but the loving and protective man advised me to kill it, particularly when Dory claimed that it was a monster she had seen. I continued to walk while rolling my cane onto its back and gently poking it with it. Yes, due to my war-related injury, I walk with a cane. I could tell immediately. It was woman. It had severe facial deformity. It appeared as though one side had been melted away, especially around the eye. As soon as I glanced down its body, I realized that the right foot had a severe infection. Its foot seemed to have been trapped in a bear trap or a leg trap. They go by a great deal of names, yet they're simply a horrendous way for a creature to pass on. It appeared that the wound began just below the great toe and ball of its foot, on the opposite side of the foot, angled downward and above the heel in the direction of the arch. The quick evaluation of my army training required that the entire foot be amputated. However, without a foot, this animal would not be able to survive in the wild. To carry out the act, I removed the safety from my weapon, and then I saw her eyes open and she looked at me, clearly pleading for assistance. I heard her gently wound and asked, "Please help me." Not the kind that would alleviate my suffering. In contrast to what I experienced in Vietnam, this being desired to remain alive, and yes, I thought I heard it. At the time, I didn't question it. I swear that happened later. She was clearly in great pain, as I could tell. I shouted to Lori and Dory, "Go dig out our big canvas family tent," without thinking. Presently, they call them hot tents, strangely. We couldn't move this animal because it was going to rain, which was almost as large as I was, and where would we relocate her? She truly appeared to be a hybrid of humans and animals. Before Dory and Lori discovered the tent, I had never seen anything like it. I told them I was going to try to save her. That seemed to be all they needed to hear. Everyone was on board to do their best. I made sense of what was the deal with her foot and the degree of disease, and out of nowhere, Dory said, "Goodness, my golly, I have a lot of medication for animals in the barn that we can use." I explained that because she was so human, I was hesitant to administer animal medication to her. If I had to, I would, however, I regretted having to. Then Dory said, "Wait a minute," her eyes widening. "I have George's PCP sack. There might also be a lot of things there that could be of use to her." I said, "Okay." Smart thought, go get it, so she did, and I was able to put her to sleep and provide her life was most likely saved by antibiotics. However, I'm getting ahead of myself once more. We experienced numerous aha moments. Dory stated that she repeatedly considered throwing away that bag. However, continued to figure she could possibly utilize it, or she got nostalgic and couldn't toss. She now knew why it was taken away. There is a reason for everything. However, I'm veering off topic. So we set the tent up around her and I gave her what we had for sedation. I'm certain it was past due. However, we crossed our fingers. I approached cleaning the awful worm-invaded wound. In all honesty, those gross parasites really saved her foot. She opened her eyes 2 or multiple times. However, she was as yet lethargic. I thought I debrided the edges to make blood stream, and afterward I wrapped it. I gave her the shot of the antibiotic in her thigh. Additionally, I instructed the girls to prepare broth and attempt to slowly introduce it to her. They used large syringes to gently squirt it into her mouth, as I recall. Dory's childhood best friend was named Luella, and Dory loved the name. As a result, the girls started calling her Luella. As a result, we began referring to her as Luella. Later in the night, as I sat on the porch and watched the tent, I noticed something in the woods. Once I had pinpointed the source of the movement, I saw an enormous black face coming out of the tree's shadow. The animal was scanning the yard, stood up, and felt for my weapon, which was still down the rear of my jeans for reasons unknown. I opened the screen door when he got there. Before it retreated behind the tree, I turned my attention to the animal. For reasons unknown, I waved at it. I saw it look shocked as its eyes widened. Essentially, I feel that is what it was. I called a friend of mine from my time in the military, who now works for the forestry department in Washington State. He replied, yes, when I asked if he had ever heard of something similar. In his region, they have observed an odd sighting. He had never seen one himself. He then said, hey, now that I think about it, in a movie, they show one of them as a creature. He promised to try to locate the name and inform me. Then he mentioned that a second movie about them, The Legend of Boggy Creek, was made. Oh my God, I said I was behind the times. I hadn't watched a movie in years. I explained to him the reason I was asking him. He advised me to get rid of it because for some reason the government doesn't want people to know about these things. He stated that any sightings were to be treated as large bear sightings and that his own boss did not want to talk about it either. Whatever you do, were his final words. Make sure I'm not the last person you told about it and throw away the evidence. After saying our goodbyes and hanging up, 45 minutes passed. He recontacted me. He said he uncovered some data. It appears that these creatures have been linked to the kidnapping of a few children in recent years. Additionally, they're said to be responsible for the devastation of campgrounds, and I'm not aware of any additional accounts. After all these years, having earlier observed the large fish at the woodline talking to a buddy from the army, I was wondering what my family was getting themselves into. I would never repent if they were hurt. I was not entitled to make that choice. After a while, I stood up to smoke and I happened to look out the window on the upper floor. I happened to see the big black one, which was standing outside the woodline like the one I saw earlier, focusing on the tent. I saw it influence multiple times. I thought then, at that point, I understood this must be Luella's dad, and no part of this was a mishap. He was aware that his child would die. You could see that there was endeavors made to cure the region with spices that were stuck to the injury, but they were aware that it didn't help. They made a fuss that night on purpose to get our attention to Luella on the lawn. As a dad, I realized he likely remained in the forest observing tensely the entire day. I opted for in the morning. In order for them to see her inside, I was going to turn the tent's opening toward the woods and leave the flaps open. Our relationship began in that manner. Every day, Luella's condition got better and got worse. After 8 days, her condition began to improve, and she continued to improve. The following day, my first day back at work, before I left, I went to check on her, and it was still dark, 3:30 a.m. So I took my spotlight and looked into the tent. I had hoped to see her asleep, but when I saw her standing up and looking at her foot, I was overjoyed. I likewise saw that her understudies in obscurity were tremendous. Her eyes were as big as those of our cow, but not expanding. I saw that she had opened up the swathe when I pointed the electric lamp at the injury. She obscured her vision, and I naturally turned it away and apologized. She then started talking as if I knew exactly what she was saying, and she extended her hand as if she were trying to better explain herself. It was charming. I instructed her to rest, promising to see her later today. She raised her hand to wave at me. I didn't be aware around then that it's anything but a Bigfoot thing. She must have realized from observing other people who in fact knew. In the end, my day was, I got to the yard where I left my truck and the safety officer emerged and said you would be advised to call home. I did, and Dory informed me that the large black man was scurrying across the lawn. Furthermore, she had not yet been able to feed the animals. So I snatched my lunchbox and my desk work and I scrambled toward home. But when I got home, everything was back to normal. I went to check on Luella while Dory and Lori fed the animals. She had been resting and I saw her swathe was off. After a brief review, it appeared to be in good condition. Considering that I did not sew it, it was in decent condition. Although Luella's foot was dark gray, the severe bruising was clearly visible. I moved her foot gently so I could see the bottom better. I had done this previously. However, she wasn't good with me contacting it. She would normally close her eyes while I wrapped the gauze around the wound. I caught her deep sigh as I looked up at her this time. She liked being touched. I pressed on her foot and observed that she felt no pain. However, all right, I was blissful. It looked good everywhere. Then Lori said, "Wow, she's looking much better," which I heard. What happens if she refuses to leave? Who could have possibly imagined more accurate words? Yet, thinking back, neither of us understood exactly how on the imprint Lori was. I would see the huge person a couple of times each week. Then, every now and then, we'd hear that strange language, followed by whoops and tree banging. Then, about 3 weeks after finding Luella on the grass at the end of May, a dead deer was at our back door when we awoke. Because its neck and back legs were broken, it must have been killed. The girls were irritated to see it this way. I went to proceed to mine Luella additionally. She was coming directly from behind the barn. I spotted that she hadn't gone to the tent to urinate where she usually had to. She was, however, now walking behind the barn. I'll be walking, but not quite. She was limping. I chose to drape the deer from a tree to get it dressed. I could tell that it had been killed recently. I perceived how charmed Luella was coincidentally. She followed my every move. Luella was horrified when I put the insides in a bucket. She stumbled over to the bucket, dug in, and she removed the liver. She ate everything while sitting there. After that, she ate that by digging up the heart. The kidneys follow. Then she stumbled to her tent, and she rested for almost 30 hours because she had eaten until she couldn't eat anymore. We assumed she realized she was protected, and she dozed as long as she expected to. However, later in the night, a severe storm began. I ran to the window when a crack user woke me up. I noticed that the tent was flapping in the wind. There was only one peg holding it down. Dory saw me at the window when she came in to wake me. I whispered to myself that I needed to go find Luella. Additionally, Dory stated that you cannot leave in this. It's far too risky. Then Lori awoke and agreed, and we all sat down to watch the storm, trying to locate Luella amid the lightning flashes. Then, when morning arrived, the storm continued to rage. It at last quit blowing so terrible, and I proceeded to snatch my coat. Luella then emerged from behind the barn. She was wet and crying. She abruptly came to a stop and appeared extremely perplexed because she was unable to see her tent. She had lived there for nearly a month and she appeared terrified. I went out with Dory to get her and we brought her to the barn. She was limping, genuinely terrible, and she let us help her, which astounded us the most. She had been wary of us touching her up until then. Luella was terrified of entering the barn as we led her there, but she eventually caved in. She curled up in a ball and quickly fell asleep after we made her feel at ease. We had already discussed our willingness to bring her into the house until we could either purchase or locate another tent for her. Additionally, Dory stated that she was uncomfortable with Luella using the restroom wherever she wanted, because back then, Luella just did her thing right any place she was and before anybody. Even though I didn't really care as an adult, it really bothered Bradley. So that was a no essentially until we could prepare her fundamentally. However, because Luella refused to enter the house, that never took place. Thinking back over the course of the years with Luella and her loved ones, I now think that the annual regular gifts, yes, leaving a deer at the back door at the end of May was an annual occurrence. I believe it was a way of saying thank you for taking care of Luella while the family returned to their mountain home. Luella grew accustomed to sleeping in the barn, but the first storm ended her comfort there. We noticed that her family either stopped coming to see us or just stopped showing up for a long time. After the injury recuperated, we saw Luella was limping genuinely horrendous, and she was unable to walk in excess of a couple of steps. She would then need to stop and rest. When we first noticed Luella leaving the barn in the evening and returning around 5:30 Amish, it was midsummer. Additionally, she spent the entire day sleeping. We knew she was nocturnal because of that. She wasn't going out to hunt or eat. She was excessively sluggish, yet she would eat berries and bugs that occurred by every day we left her a bowl of food. Although she would eat cooked food, she preferred her food raw. We saw that she would eat chicken feed or the kitchen scraps that we set to the side for the chickens. She also ate from our enormous bag of dog food. She truly had no apprehensions about what she ate. Dory and Lori went out one night, opted to go with Luella into the woods to check out her route. She was found sitting by the river by them. Observing in the direction Dory first saw them, we first began to hear Luella squealing like a banshee toward the end of September. She was in the woods, but she was screaming and making a fuss. Lori said as I was about to check it out, "What fantastic news that Lou's family has returned." And that is precisely what transpired. I noticed that this email has grown quite lengthy. As a result, from now on, I'll just try to emphasize the most important points. Alright, we started seeing examples with her family. Luella spent the majority of the fall, winter, and spring. Despite the fact that she frequently stayed in the barn to sleep, we seldom took care of her from the woods. We would frequently observe the big guy watching the farm. Despite the fact that he was still in pretty amazing shape, you could tell he was getting older. Along with him, there would also be smaller women with graying hair. Those two were never apart. One of them was Luella's aunt, and the other was probably Luella's mother. The two of them simply kind of remained back behind the large person constantly. There were occasionally minors as well. Some were close to adulthood. We called them Huey, Dewey, and Louie because we had insufficient luck with them to determine whether they were male or female. They all appeared to be of similar ages. Lori and Dory were of the opinion that they were most likely the offspring of Big Guy and that he was most likely mating with Mama and Auntie. However, they didn't know we never seen one more enormous male next to the large person. Luella was smaller than the other juveniles, giving the impression that she was the youngest of the children. However, she grew to be very lean and 7 feet tall, just like her mother. She limped throughout her entire life because her foot never fully healed. Luella and Bradley never really got along. They got along just fine. But Bradley suddenly gave her a walking stick or a crutch made of shop glass one year. He went into the woods and cut a 7-inch wide long branch with a V shape so Luella could lay her weight on it. Should she require a break, that branch was scraped down by him until there were no flaws. After that, he repeatedly sanded, varnished, and varnished it until it was beautiful. Sadly, Dory passed away from breast cancer in 1990. Additionally, Luella suffered greatly from depression. The same thing caused me to lose my truck in 2013 as well. Again, Luella's sadness was too much to bear. Desired a share of their mother's property. Dory had prepared 2 boxes for them before she passed away. When we inquired about the contents of the boxes, Dory informed us that they contained all of their childhood mementos, that she had clutched and attempted to give them again and again. As a result, she could store more. She then stated, "I promise they will come and get their boxes." Furthermore, adequately interesting, Dory didn't maintain that they should have anything from her since it had been a long time since they even tried to call her. Then, after Lori kicked the bucket, I got a comparative letter. It would appear that if Lori lacked willpower, then those jerks would be qualified for a portion of the property. However, fortunately she did. If these two were to acquire some of that land, I consider what would have happened to Luella. However, each year the clan would return to the mountains. We believed because they didn't like to be outside in the heat. Despite the fact that some decide to stay through summer, however, we were concerned that Luella's disabilities prevented her from attending. Her foot, without a doubt, yet additionally anything that it was that caused her face distortions. She appeared to have suffered a stroke as a teen. She had not moved at all on that side of her face, which drooped completely. In any case, just all over. When I recall what Dory told us about her first encounter with them, while the entire family ate, Luella went off to her own space. and afterward the enormous person pulled off a piece of meat and took it to her. I believe Luella had become an unnecessary burden for the clan. After that, when she was hurt, her weight became excessively. I never questioned that he cherished his girl. Luella did exceptional things for us constantly. For Dory, she collected eggs, and if she broke one, she would eat it. Nothing was wasted. She contributed to the garden. She showed us all affection except for my son Brad. Luella would gently push Brad away from us or throw things at him when he first expressed his dislike for us. Be that as it may, harming him was rarely finished. It was similar to rivalry between siblings. After his mother's death, Bradley visited the farm. He and I were outside having a cigarette and a brew. Furthermore, Luella came from the forest and strolled directly over to Brad. She also stood next to his chair and put a huge hand on his shoulder. Applying a light squeeze, Brad arrived at up and laid his hand on hers. After grunting, she stumbled into the barn. Bradley separated for a couple of moments and afterward shook it off. That was the most affection they had ever shown one another. 6 years ago then, I went out to give the animals food. Furthermore, I looked in her slow down as I strolled by, and all of a sudden I detected a strange odor that I hadn't experienced in years. I felt a flood of dread come over me, and I ventured back a couple of feet and thoroughly searched in at Luella. I knew she was no more when I repeatedly called her name. I contacted Brad and requested his immediate appearance. He also showed up a few hours later. I was still sitting next to my one and only daughter and holding her hand. I simply did not want her to be alone now or in the future. I still miss her to this day. I envisioned she was about Bradley's age when we tracked down her on the grass. Furthermore, he was around 10 years of age around then. She went through puberty and human growth patterns for several more years. She was by all accounts on target for a 10 to 12-year-old young lady. Despite the fact that her species is significantly larger than ours, in any case she would have been approximately 50 years old. Now, I wonder if she was born disabled. Did she not intend to live long? I hope she lived a long and happy life with us. She brought joy to our lives, that's certain. That autumn, the big guy showed up at approximately 6 p.m. also remained at the wood line as he generally did. I went outside and approached him. Because I'd never done that before, I caused him to look confused. I delicately snatched his hand. I also gave him a large section of Luella's hair that I had cut for him. What's more, no words must be traded. It was all said by the tears streaming down my face. Now that the confusion was gone, I could see it. After that, he left. I wasn't expecting the woods to erupt that night for some reason, but they didn't. When the family arrived to see Luella, that night was quiet for the first time I can remember. My encounter with the Sasquatch family was like that. I realized they actually come around. However, I believe the big guys and Luella's mom have both passed away, because they still brought me a deer at the end of spring each year, even after Luella passed away. Prior to their departure for the mountains, the following years they failed to deliver a single deer, and the following year nothing. This story was written in April, but I decided to keep it until the end of May, in case the big guy dropped me off on a deer, just in case I truly trusted that that would occur. Yet it didn't. At least now I know they're in heaven with their child. Sincerely, I could go on forever. But I wanted to talk about the communication. It was, in my opinion, telepathy. In any case, we talked more in contemplations. I would get visual representations of her thoughts or one-word phrases. For instance, if she was going to get Dory the eggs, I'd either see or hear the word egg. Telepathy did not result in lengthy conversations. I guess we just knew it. Luella stopped using the bathroom inside the house after she went to the barn. She just learned to go outside by herself. She never caused us any problems.